And now, please welcome Laimon Eglentals.
I have a message for you today, a sermon. So I'll start this out. Who loves their pet dog and what they do? Well, there was a pet dog named Leo. This is the story of Leo. Normally, Leo would run away at the sight of a bigger dog. The small dachshund liked most to cuddle with his owner or ride in the back seat of the family car. Owner Biljana said Leo was a fun, happy dog who liked most to jump straight into the lap of whoever came into the house, happily licking the guests to welcome them. But one day, Leo showed that true bravery knows no limits. When a raging bull mastiff crossbreed attacked Nicolina, a 12-year-old girl, Leo fearlessly jumped to her rescue, barking and biting at the dog way beyond his size and strength. She recalled returning home from a friend's house when the neighbour's guard dog came down the street, jumped at her from behind, and grabbed her arm. The dog nailed the girl to the ground, pulling her left leg and right leg with his jaws. I screamed, and Leo rushed out and barked and ran around, biting him on the leg, she said. When the dog let go of me, he looked around and then stormed at Leo. Leo didn't stand a chance. Despite efforts by veterinarians, his injuries were too severe and Leo died 2 days later. Leo paid with his life. That dog was just too big and Leo was so small, said Biljana, her eyes filling with tears. The family now has a new dachshund named Dijol, a gift from the local breeders touched by Leo's heroism. Leo, the little dachshund, gave his life as a sacrifice so a young girl named Nicolina could live. He was a true picture of a sacrifice giving his life. When we came and we have this picture of sacrifice, in Christian circles we tend not to image and have a picture of a sacrifice like so many other beliefs have had over history. And when we look at a sacrifice, what actually is a sacrifice as we can understand it? Well, it really is an exchange. I will do this, and in exchange, this will happen. A sacrifice, as we had a picture for Leo, is he gave his life so another girl could live and not be attacked. And it comes a bit like a balancing scale. If I want to appease God, I have to sacrifice. To get and earn God's favour, we give, we sacrifice. Through so many different beliefs, such as paganism, it would always be a blood sacrifice. Now, I don't know why, but it seems to be they always use chooks. And the chooks would be the one that would have their heads cut off and they'd be given up to a god because someone wanted healing. So what do? You bring the chook, you sacrifice it to some shaman, doctor or whatever he is, and hopefully you are healed. You give a sacrifice in exchange for wanting favour or wanting healing. The ancient Mayans in Central America, they had a huge ritual of sacrifices where they built these huge temples. And at the top of them, they would take the captives and the slaves from war raids, and they would actually kill these people on top of these altars and rip out their hearts as a sacrifice to appease their gods, to try to win their God's favour. When we look in the Bible, there's stories of the Philistines. And when we look and we hear, we think, these Philistines always seems to be the real bad ones that always get the bad word in the Bible. Well, what was it? Why were they looked down upon so much, especially by God? The Philistines, in their religion and their beliefs, they had a god such as Moloch. And what would happen is they would have so many children. They had temple prostitution, which basically ended up with too many children. And when you have too many children that are unwanted by people, they want to get rid of and discard them. So they offered their infants and their children to these gods to appeal to them, to try to make their case. And that is what God found so detestable, that they were giving human sacrifices to try to appease a god to win its favour. In the Roman days too, sacrifice was a normal, big part of everyday life. Sacrifice was to the Caesars. You would offer a bull or you would offer an animal to sacrifice unto Caesar to win Rome's favour. The big difference in early Christianity that got it in trouble more than any other thing is not that Romans hated Christians. It's that Christians, at the time, they did not do one thing that the Romans expected everyone else to do. The Christians didn't sacrifice unto Rome, unto Caesar. Any other religions would have a sacrifice for their gods and sacrifice to Caesar. Christians, they didn't sacrifice to anyone at all, and that's what got them in trouble. When we look at the Bible, we can see and go through there's a history, a strong aspect of a sacrificial system. It really starts right out from the start. If you look throughout the Old Testament, there's pictures of sins. Sometimes the nation of Israel would sin. And corporately, for the sins of a nation, there would be a requirement to go and sacrifice a bull. So the bull's blood would cleanse the nation. Then there was also other sins that required not a bull for a sacrifice, but lambs. The blood of a lamb would be sprinkled to cover the sins of someone committed. But if you were too poor, maybe you couldn't afford a lamb, or you didn't have a bull, you might sacrifice a dove, and the blood of the dove would be there to cover and wash you clean. The Bible actually starts with the story right near the start of a sacrifice. When we look, one of the first stories is of two brothers, Cain and Abel, and they both actually went to worship. When we look at Cain, he actually did go to worship, but what the thing was, he worshipped and gave a sacrifice in the wrong way. He was a farmer, and so he brought with him an offering of his fruit and the grain and the crop that he had, while Abel was a shepherd. And Abel went and he actually brought forth and had a lamb, and the lamb was sacrificed, and the lamb was slain, and its blood was accepted by God, while Cain's offering and his sacrifice wasn't. There was an offering of food, or there's an offering of blood. And the offering of blood is the one that God accepted. We also come across in Genesis, and there's another strange story that for most people it seems so odd and so different with us in our world today. But we have Abraham and his son, his promised son Isaac. Isaac was the one that Abraham was going to bestow his blessing and his inheritance to. But then God came around and God said this. And he said to Abraham in Genesis 22, verse 2, he said, "Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering. On a mountain I will show you." So Abraham was required to sacrifice his own son, the one that God had promised, the one who actually was there as his child. So the father is there sacrificing the son. We look at it now, and if we only see that story, we have this strange, weird story of an about to have a sacrifice, of a human sacrifice of a father to his son. Isaac takes the timber and walks up 3 days' journey with Abraham, asking where the sacrifice is. They had no lamb. And Abraham was saying, "The Lord will provide." They build an altar, and as Abraham's about to go and cut with a knife to kill Isaac, that's when an angel appears and says, "No, wait, don't do that." And they then see that there is a lamb provided, a lamb that's caught in the thickets, and they sacrifice the lamb instead. We have a picture there of the gospel in miniature, of a loving father who is having a son who is a willing sacrifice, who carries the burden on his back with him, and then the lamb is provided. So it's very much a gospel picture. But at the start, there's a picture of a son who's to be sacrificed. Further over, as we look through the Bible, there's more stories of sacrifice. The children of Israel are there, and they're about to be led out of Egypt and about to be going delivered. After 9 plagues has already been through in the land of Egypt, the 10th plague is called out, and it's one where the instructions are given for the children of Israel to do something different. There would be a plague, there would be an angel of death coming through to kill the firstborn children. And the requirement was for the children of Israel is they would get there and they would sprinkle blood or paint blood that goes over the doorposts and above their house in blood. So when the angel came through, the blood would cover them. The blood would cover over their household, so the angel would pass by and the son would be spared. There is a picture there once again of the blood sparing for a sacrifice. It says this in Exodus chapter 12, verse 12 and 13. On that same night I will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn of both people and animals, and I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. The blood will be a sign for you on the houses where you are, and when I see the blood, I will pass over you. No destructive plague will touch you when I strike Egypt. The important thing, as we see and look at this picture of a sacrifice there and the blood sparing the people of Israel, is it was by blood. It wasn't a sacrifice of gold or silver. It wasn't a sacrifice of having a great house you gave up for the Lord or your time. It was a sacrifice of blood, and that blood would cover over them. As you look through the biblical accounts of sacrifice through the Old Testament, it is always of blood. Take a picture and go on a journey as if you're out there and about to walk in and see the tabernacle that the children of Israel built. It was set out so that there was a perimeter in a rectangle, and that perimeter was in a curtained area. As you go through and pass through those curtains, you had an outer court. Walking in through that outer court, what you would see before you is there was an altar for burnt offerings. And there on the altar you would come up and there would be the priests who would slaughter the animals, be it bulls or lambs or doves. And they would collect the basin of the blood, and they'd take that with them. As they went past that altar, there would also be a laver of bronze where they would cleanse and wash. And then the next would be the tabernacle itself, where the first compartment as you go through into it is the holy place. And in there, as you come through, there's a lampstand, the golden lampstand, the menorah. There's a table of showbread. There's also an altar of incense. And the blood may be sprinkled there. Next, you come up to a curtain. And inside there is the most holy place, the place where God dwelt and was amongst with his people. In that most holy place, there was the Ark of the Covenant, the gold ark that had the cherubim with the wings over it, and inside the ark was there was the Ten Commandments. And on there, and on the mercy seat before it, one day a year, the high priest would come and sprinkle the blood onto the mercy seat on the Day of Atonement. He would take that blood to sprinkle right into the presence of God's most holy place. Well, you have this picture all through the Old Testament of a blood sacrifice. That isn't just where it ends. There's actually a reason and it's looking forward to something. And I'd like to go through and read the sacrifice and the best example I could look and find. You know this verse and this chapter quite well, I'm sure. And it's in Isaiah 53. I'm looking at verses 5 down to verse 10. It says this: "But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. We, all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as the sheep before its shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away, yet who of his generation protested? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgression of my people he was punished. He was assigned a grave with the wicked, and with the rich in his death, though he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. Yet it was the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer. And though the Lord makes his life an offering for sin. There we have a summary of Jesus, a summary of Jesus and the sacrifice he gave for us. And you look and you go through the details, it is so amazing and so precise, saying that he was pierced as Jesus had his hands and feet pierced. He took upon the punishment and the iniquities of us all. But because of those pierced, because of those wounds, we are actually healed. We're healed because of Jesus' blood. We're the ones who've gone astray, but the iniquity of the Lord has laid the iniquity of us onto him, onto Jesus instead. He didn't open his mouth when he was accused. He was like the lamb to the slaughter and willingly went through that sacrifice. And as it goes down, his grave was with the wicked because he was charged as a criminal. But he wasn't given a criminal's burial. He was given a rich man's burial when he was buried in Joseph's tomb. So what we have here, and the amazing thing, as you look at Isaiah, and it's showing a picture of Jesus' sacrifice, is that is in Isaiah, and that is in the Old Testament. And that is, that chapter here is written hundreds of years before Christ's death. And we will look at those verses, and it tells us so well and so clearly about Jesus and his sacrifice that was to come. Sacrifice is such a big system and such a big concept going through the Bible. You could spend hours and hours or days and days reading through and going through all that. I'd like to go over and have a look at another chapter, and that's in Hebrews 9. Hebrews goes through and talks about the Old Testament symbolism. It talks about the sacrifice, it talks about the priests, and it talks about the tabernacle. But it's going through and it's explaining it now that Jesus has died and been on the cross, what all that means, and understanding the Old Testament from the New Testament and how that applies to us. Hebrews chapter 9, verse 1 onwards. Now the first covenant had regulations for worship and for an earthly sanctuary. There was a sanctuary in the wilderness in Israel. There was the first temple in Jerusalem. There was a second temple. That was what was happening there. The tabernacle was set up. In its first room were the lampstand and the table with its consecrated bread. This was called the holy place. Behind the second curtain was a room called the most holy place, which had a golden altar of incense and the gold ark of the covenant. This ark contained the gold jar of manna, Aaron's staff that had budded, and the stone tablets of the covenant. Above the ark were the cherubim of the glory, overshadowing the atonement cover. But we cannot discuss these things in detail now. When everything had been arranged like this, the priests entered regularly into the outer room to carry on their ministry. But only the high priest entered into the inner room, into the most holy place there. And that only at once a year, and never without blood, which he offered for himself and for the sins of the people he had committed in ignorance. So it's showing you this little picture here in Hebrews that the high priest would take with him an offering of blood for the people to cleanse them from that. Going on from verse 8. The Holy Spirit was showing this by this that the way into the most holy place had not yet been disclosed as long as the first tabernacle was still functioning. This is an illustration for the present time, indicating that the gifts and sacrifices being offered were not able to clear the conscience of the worshipper. They are only a matter of food and drink and various ceremonial washings, external regulations applying until the time of the new order. But, and I always love it when there's a but. What is it? How does that change things? But when Christ came as the high priest of the good things that are now already here, he went through the greater and more perfect tabernacle that is not made of human hands. That is to say, is not part of this creation. He did not enter by means of the blood of goats and calves, but he entered the most holy place once for all by his own blood, thus obtaining eternal redemption. So what we have here in this picture is Jesus fulfilling and showing all of the roles of the priest and the sacrifice. He didn't have to come in with an animal. He didn't have to come and have a bull slaughtered for his own sins. He was there because he was pure. He was fulfilling the high priest role. He was the one who could come in to offer that sacrifice because Christ's blood covered everything. When we look and we think about the blood that covers the sins, it's really easy for us as Christians to think and have a view that, yes, I'm saved and yes, I'm covered because I have Jesus there. But you know the interesting thing, Jesus' atonement, Jesus' sacrifice and what he did? It actually says he came to die for the sins of the world. In 1 John 2 verse 2 it says, he is the atoning sacrifice for our sins. Not only for our sins, but also for the sins of the whole world. Think of that, the sins of the whole world. So that means if there's someone homeless on drugs down the street, Jesus died for their sins. Jesus died for the sins of the prostitutes. Jesus died for the sins of everyone. He died for the sins of the Hindus. He died for the sins of the Buddhists. He died for the sins of those who have a great moral life. He died for those who aren't Christian. He died for the sins of everyone. So we need to remember and think, Jesus' atoning death and sacrifice, his blood covered every single one of us, all of us who have ever lived. It doesn't matter who we are, it doesn't matter what stage it is, Jesus gave us that atonement, not on our efforts at all. It's interesting when we look at this picture of sacrifice, because Christians, we don't sacrifice, we don't have blood offerings. The interesting thing when we look and we have this picture all through the Old Testament is there was sacrifices. But if you go to Jews today and synagogues and in Israel, there's no sacrifices. Judaism doesn't have a sacrificial system anymore. Now, why is that? Well, because in history what happened, there is a need for Jews to have their sacrifices in the temple that was in Jerusalem. But as we know our history, in AD 70, the Roman army, because of an uprising, they came through, they demolished the temple, they destroyed Jerusalem, and since that day on, without a temple, they've been nowhere to sacrifice. So, as well as Christians, Jews don't actually offer any more blood sacrifices because under their laws and the rules and the regulations, it isn't available to function. So, when we look at this picture of sacrifices, and especially that we live in a world without sacrifices, and it's very hard to get that picture, but it's really a bit like computer coding. Now, I'm going to tell you that I'm really not particularly into computer coding. I did once try a very minimal thing. Someone showed me to try to do some things. It was completely fine to me. I managed a little thing, but I was just retyping something and I had no idea what it meant and why it was doing anything, so I'm not a computer programmer. But the basis of computing program is very simple in the concept. It's basically this. If something happens, or some set of parameters, then do this. If the computer senses that there's light or dark, and then it can focus. If it picks up voices at this level, it will change audio levels. If a computer can do something, it can help you drive a car down the road. All these things are based on very basic assumptions that they can fine-tune more and more. Is if this happens, then do this. Now, a sacrificial system is really very similar. It is like, if I sacrifice this, a goat, a lamb, then the gods will be with me. If I do this, God will love me. If I do that, God will accept me. If I do this, well then, maybe God will heal me. So, if I came and I had a picture today of an illustration to use, if I came and I brought in a chook or a goat or something, and I came and brought it in and was about to cut its head off, most of you will be shocked. I'd probably actually face some law in Australia for about animal cruelty or something, and I'm sure I couldn't broadcast it online. We are in a situation where we are so devoid and out of touch with this concept of a blood sacrifice. But do we act and we behave in a similar way without that? Do we still try to make a sacrifice to God to earn God's favour, to try to get God on our side, to try to get God to love us? Think of it like this. If I give up smoking, will God love me more? If I stop drinking, will God accept me more? If I stop abusing someone and beating them up, will God be on my side? If I gave up whatever it is, will God accept me? It's the same thing, isn't it? We're taking away and not having it about a sacrifice of blood, but we're making a sacrifice of something about ourselves. And why are we doing it? To try to win God's favour. I said it that way, but can we also do, if I go to church all the time, will God heal me? If I pray, will God love me more? And is there something about me that's making me something I sacrifice to earn God's favour? Are we still doing that? In our lives, do we do it all the time? Think of it in relationships and how we deal with others. If I work really hard, and if I get a good job, and have a really nice house, and do something else, will my boss approve of me more? Will my family love me more if I can do and provide for them? Or if it's a bit different for a woman, it might be if I look beautiful and raise the kids and do everything and tell him I love him. Will he love me more? And will he accept me more? Is this thing of we're trying to sacrifice in our work, in our relationships, in our careers, so we can get something else out of it, something different? Well, are we trying to do the same with God? Are we trying to make a religious exchange with God? If I do this, then God, you're going to do something for me. Are we really trying to bribe God? Now, it's rules against bribery in a lot of countries. We don't try to do it. It gets us in trouble. But do we come to God and try to bribe him? Do we try to bribe God to get him to do something for us just because what we can offer to him? That is really called a sacrifice. And it's really a bit called corruption too. See, now we are no longer called to sacrifice. We aren't called to give up and make and change and offer something to God so God will love us, so God will be on our sides. We can't exchange our good efforts, our good works. I can't exchange my good morals to try to, if I had good morals or works or efforts, I can't exchange them to make God love me. How's God going to love me more anywhere different when his death paid for the sins of the world? I've got nothing at all to offer on that. So it's no more this concept of if I do this, then God will love me. Then God will accept me. Pagans require a sacrifice. They sacrifice, so hopefully for a lot of them in there, they're probably trying to get a healing from an ailment. Greeks in the old Greek legends and mythology, they were requiring sacrifices to their gods, that they would have sacrifices at temples to Zeus and Athena and various other Greek gods. Judaism, even itself, had to require sacrifices of blood, but no more. And you think of even another religion which doesn't require, and I'll specifically say there's no requirement for any blood sacrifice or any traditional sacrifice as it's usually understood, but you look at the Muslim faith and there's a requirement, not of any blood or any animals, but there's a requirement to do things, that if you do something, well, your requirements are. If you may know, in the world at the moment, I was driving home and I saw the sunset and there was a slither of the moon. Basically, that's meaning that right from yesterday, I believe, the Ramadan is finished for Muslims. And for Muslims, what the requirements are, or some of them, is to fast for the month. There's also the requirement to go on pilgrimage. There's a requirement to pray 5 times a day, to give alms. And it's not necessarily that many of these things are bad at all. They're probably quite good things to do in of themselves for some things, and if you're Muslim, that's a requirement. But there's a requirement to do these things to earn the favour. It's a sacrifice of time or of resources or of, trips away. See, there's a sacrifice in virtually every religious and spiritual system, but there is one that's completely different. And Christianity is that one that is completely different, because we're not required to sacrifice to God like that. We're not trying to go and have that system. It's been stopped. It's been done away with. Instead, the concept's been changed and it's turned around into something really, really quite different. It is, God did it. And what's my requirement? Then I accept it. So it's no more, if I do this, then God will have my favour. It's God did. Jesus came down, he died on a cross, he cleansed us by his blood because he was worth the whole world as a creator. And by that he washed us and cleansed us clean. Because God did it, I am accepted. The whole formula has been completely changed around about the sacrificial system. It's to accept it. A life-size bronze statue of Leo was put up next to a children's playground in the city's park, honouring the dog and teaching kids about animal friendship and sacrifice in Serbia. An alert-looking Leo, his head raised above his stretched paws, now rests proudly on a white base surrounded by flowers. Nicolina, the girl Leo defended, often comes by. I am so glad Leo has a monument. He turned out to be a real hero. In the park, children have been flocking around Leo's monument, patting the dog's head and his big ears. Some have taken pictures next to Leo, laid flowers or left dog treats by the statue. The inscription on the monument reads, "To all the small heroes with big hearts." Leo was a sacrifice. As the Bible says, greater love has no one than this, to lay down his own life for one's friends. Leo was a sacrifice so a girl could live who was attacked. Jesus is our sacrifice so that we could live. So when we are attacked spiritually by the enemy, we don't have to be defeated. All we have to do on this, we don't have to appeal to God. We don't have to sacrifice to God to earn his covering, earn his favour, to wash us clean. All we have to do is to accept. Accept the sacrifice, accept Jesus, accept that he has washed us clean and made us pure.
To help you understand God's Word in a whole new way, go to goodnewsunlimited.com. You can sign up there to get your free devotional delivered to you each day. This program has been paid for by the partners and friends of Good News Unlimited. Word spreads fast.